The Christmas Angel of Death. Chapter 1. The Season of Goodwill. The first snow had fallen on Winterbourne Manor, 3 days before Christmas, transforming the Berkshire estate into something from a Victorian greeting card. Miss Jane Marple, watching from the morning room window as her hostess's grandchildren built a lopsided snowman on the south lawn, thought it almost too perfect, the sort of perfection that in her experience often concealed something rather less picturesque beneath. More tea, Miss Marple. Eleanor Ashworth moved with the practiced grace of a woman who had been mistress of Winterbourne for 40 years. She was 72, silver-haired, and possessed of that particular brand of aristocratic charm that could make one feel simultaneously welcomed and gently reminded of one's place. She had been Jane's schoolmate, centuries ago it seemed, before Eleanor had married brilliantly and Jane had returned to St. Mary Mead. "Thank you, my dear. It's such a lovely prospect." Miss Marple accepted the delicate cup, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, a pale blue cardigan for her great-nephew's first child. "Though I must say, the snow does make everything look rather isolated." "Oh, we're quite used to it. The village is only 2 miles, and we have everyone here for Christmas in any case." Eleanor's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Family, you know. One must have family at Christmas." There was something in that emphasis that made Miss Marple glance up from her knitting. One must have family, not one wants family. It was a small distinction, but in her experience, small distinctions often mattered most. The door opened to admit a man of perhaps 50, handsome in that faded way of men who had been quite dashing in their youth. "Mother, have you seen Vera? She promised to help with the kissing bows, but, oh, I beg your pardon. Miss Marple. My son Charles." "Charles? You remember my old friend Jane Marple?" "Of course. Delighted you could join us, Miss Marple." Charles Ashworth's handshake was firm, his smile automatic. "Vera's in the library, I believe, helping Uncle Sebastian with something or other." A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. Gone so quickly, Miss Marple might have imagined it. "Sebastian arrived this morning," she explained. "My late husband's brother. We hadn't seen him in, oh, it must be 15 years. Rather unexpected, his writing that he wished to spend Christmas with us. Family is family," Charles said, echoing his mother's earlier sentiment with even less conviction. "Though why he's chosen to shut himself up with Vera, discussing heaven knows what dusty legal matters." "Sebastian was a solicitor," Eleanor interjected. "Before his retirement, Vera's been having some difficulty with her late father's estate. Vera is Charles's wife," Eleanor added for Miss Marple's benefit, though something in her tone suggested the relationship bore explaining beyond mere identification. Miss Marple nodded, filing away these small details, as one might tuck away pieces of fabric for a future patchwork. Mary Mead, when old solicitors emerged from 15 years of absence to discuss inheritances at Christmas, it generally meant someone's financial affairs were not quite what they seemed. The afternoon passed pleasantly enough. Miss Marple was introduced to the household. Vera Ashworth, a nervous woman of 40, with beautiful hands that twisted constantly at her pearl necklace. The Ashworth children, Philip, 23, and rather too pleased with himself, and Catherine, 20, who had the strained gaiety of someone determined to enjoy Christmas by sheer force of will, and Mrs. Yates, the housekeeper, who had been with the family 30 years and possessed the sort of face that revealed nothing and remembered everything. There was also Dr. Marcus Fenton, an old family friend staying for the holiday, whose too frequent whiskey consumption before dinner made him jovial in that exhausting way of men who drink to avoid thinking, and the vicar, Mr. Thornley, who had been invited to dine, a thin, intense young man with burning eyes and a tendency to quote scripture at odd moments. Uncle Sebastian she did not meet until dinner. He was a small, dry man of 75, with the face of someone who had spent a lifetime examining documents for discrepancies and finding them. He said little during the meal, but his eyes moved constantly from face to face, and twice Miss Marple saw him watching Eleanor with an expression she could only describe as sorrowful. It was during the carol singing after dinner that the first truly discordant note was struck. They had gathered in the drawing room, the family, the guests, even Mrs. Yates and the younger servants, for Eleanor believed in maintaining certain traditions. The great tree sparkled with candles, and atop it perched an exquisite angel, ivory and gold, with painted wings spread wide. "That angel has crowned our tree for 50 years, Eleanor said softly, standing beside Miss Marple as the others arranged themselves around the piano. My husband's mother brought it from Germany. Rather appropriate, don't you think? Angels watching over us at Christmas. They began with O Come All Ye Faithful, Catherine playing with more enthusiasm than skill. Miss Marple, who had a sweet if quavering soprano, sang along while observing the room. Young Philip didn't sing at all, merely mouthed the words while watching his sister with an odd intensity. Doctor Fenton sang loudly and off-key. The vicar sang with his eyes closed as though the words pained him. It was when they reached "Hark, the herald angels sing" that it happened. Sebastian's voice, surprisingly strong for such a small man, cut across the others at the line, about peace on earth and mercy mild. "There's precious little mercy in this house," he said clearly. The piano stopped. Catherine's hands hung frozen above the keys. "I beg your pardon?" Eleanor's voice could have frozen the Thames. Sebastian stood, steadying himself against the back of his chair. He looked directly at his sister-in-law, and Miss Marple saw something almost like pity in his face. 40 years of lying, Eleanor. Even at Christmas. Even now? Uncle? You're overwrought, Charles began. But Sebastian ignored him. I've been silent too long. Conscience, you know? Deathbed conscience, one might call it. Though I hope I've a few more Christmases in me yet. He smiled. But it was ghastly. But I've made my decision. Tomorrow, on Christmas Eve, I shall tell the truth about what happened here. About the money. About the real reason James died. Eleanor Ashworth had gone white as the snow outside. You're ill, Dr. Fenton. Surely. I'm perfectly well, thank you. Merely tired of lies. Sebastian bowed slightly. Forgive me for spoiling the carols. I'll bid you all good night. He left the room in silence. After a moment, Catherine began playing again, but the singing had lost its heart. Miss Marple noticed several things in quick succession. Vera's hands had finally stopped twisting her pearls and hung limp in her lap. Philip had begun to smile, a small, satisfied smile. Dr. Fenton had gone to the sideboard and poured himself a very large brandy indeed, and Eleanor Ashworth stood perfectly still beneath the Christmas tree, looking up at the golden angel, as though it might offer her some reprieve from judgment. Later, as Miss Marple prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of another Christmas, years ago in St. Mary Mead, when old Colonel Bantry had received an unexpected visitor who claimed to know secrets about the Colonel's time in India. The visitor had died before he could speak. Quite naturally, the doctors said. A heart condition. She looked out at the snow falling steadily now, covering the grounds, isolating the manor from the village, from help, from the ordinary world of laws and policemen. Dear me, Miss Marple murmured to herself, settling her spectacles on the nightstand. How very unfortunate. One does hope poor Mr. Sebastian takes care with his health. But in her heart, with that knowledge that came from 70 years of observing human nature at its most desperately human, she rather thought he wouldn't live to see Christmas Eve. Chapter 2. Shadows Among the Tinsel. Miss Marple woke to the sound of voices in the corridor outside her room. The bedside clock showed 7:30, rather early for household drama, though in her experience, trouble kept no particular schedule. Simply cannot allow it. Mother will be devastated. That was Charles Ashworth, his cultivated tones sharp with anxiety. What exactly can you do to stop him? Vera's voice, normally so timid, carried a brittle edge. He's determined, Charles. You heard him last night. Then we'll have to be equally determined. Their footsteps receded down the hallway. Miss Marple rose and dressed with her usual care, choosing a sensible wool dress in dove grey. Christmas Eve it might be, but the atmosphere at Winterbourne Manor seemed to call for something less than festive colours. Breakfast was a strained affair. Eleanor presided over the coffee urn with rigid composure, her face carefully powdered to conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. Catherine pushed eggs about her plate without eating. Only Philip seemed in good spirits, chatting with Dr. Fenton about the Boxing Day shoot as though nothing untoward had occurred. Sebastian did not appear. Uncle Sebastian takes breakfast in his room, Eleanor announced to no one in particular. His digestion, you understand. At his age, one must be careful. Miss Marple, spreading marmalade on her toast, thought that Sebastian's digestion had seemed perfectly adequate when he'd eaten a hearty dinner the night before, but she said nothing, merely nodded sympathetically. After breakfast, the household turned to Christmas Eve preparations. The vicar, Mr. Thornley, arrived early to finalize arrangements for the midnight service. Miss Marple found him in the chapel. Winterbourne had its own small chapel, a medieval remnant attached to the east wing kneeling before the altar with an intensity that seemed almost violent. Such a beautiful space, Miss Marple observed gently from the doorway. Thornley started, then rose quickly, brushing dust from his knees. Miss Marple. Yes, quite beautiful. Mrs. Ashworth has been extraordinarily generous to our parish. Extraordinarily. He paused, his hands gripping the back of a pew. One hopes such generosity springs from genuine Christian charity rather than other motivations. Other motivations. His smile was bitter. Conscience money, perhaps, though I shouldn't speak ill. Judge not, lest ye be judged. He moved past her toward the door, then turned back. Have you met Sebastian Ashworth? Miss Marple. Only briefly, at dinner. He came to see me yesterday, before he arrived here. Wanted to make a confession, he said. Not religious confession, you understand, but a legal one. Something that had weighed on him for years. Thornley's eyes burned with that peculiar fervor of the recently ordained. I told him truth and honesty were always God's will, no matter who might be hurt. The truth shall make you free, Scripture tells us. And sometimes, Miss Marple said quietly, it makes one quite dead. The vicar blinked at her. I beg your pardon. Nothing, dear. Just an old woman's rambling. Now about the service tonight, will you need help with the flowers? She spent the late morning assisting Catherine with the chapel decorations, which provided an excellent opportunity for observation. The girl was intelligent and restless, clearly bored by country life and chafing at some invisible restriction. Mother insists we spend every Christmas here, Catherine said, snipping holly with more force than necessary. Every single one since I was born, even when Philip and I wanted to travel, even when I was engaged and wanted to spend the holiday with Richard's family, she wouldn't hear of it. Family traditions, she says, as if tradition were more important than happiness. You were engaged? Miss Marple adjusted a spray of evergreen. 2 years ago, Richard Denton, a wonderful man, but Mother discovered his father had been involved in some sort of financial scandal, completely unrelated to Richard, mind you, and she forbade the match. Catherine's laugh was harsh. Forbade it, as though we were living in a Jane Austen novel. And Father, of course, supported her. Absolutely. He always did. Your father passed away. When was it? 5 years ago. Heart attack. Very sudden. Catherine's voice softened slightly. He was a good man, really. Weak, perhaps, but kind. Not like Mother. And your Uncle Sebastian, had you met him before this visit? Never. Mother said he and Father had a terrible falling out years ago, before Philip and I were born. She would never speak of it. Catherine secured the last of the holly to the pew end. But now he arrives, making cryptic accusations threatening to reveal secrets. It's almost biblical, isn't it? The spectre at the feast. The luncheon bell rang. As they walked back to the house, Miss Marple noticed Sebastian's window on the second floor. The curtains were drawn, though it was well past noon. Lunch was served in the small dining room, cold meats and a savoury pie, for the staff were occupied with preparing the evening's Christmas Eve feast. Sebastian appeared, looking grey but determined. He ate little, refused wine, and ignored the attempts at conversation around him. It was Philip who finally addressed the situation directly. Uncle Sebastian, this revelation you've promised us, might we not hear it now and be done with the suspense? All this melodrama seems rather unnecessary. Sebastian studied his nephew with something like amusement. Eager. Are we? I wonder why. What do you imagine I might say? Philip. I imagine you'll say, whatever serves your purposes best. You always were a solicitor, after all, trained to make arguments, to twist facts, to discover truth, boy. That's what a good solicitor does. Discovers truth buried under layers of lies and legal fictions. Sebastian set down his fork with finality. But no, I'll speak tonight after the service. A proper Christmas Eve revelation, when we're all gathered in Christian fellowship, seems appropriate somehow. Eleanor's cup rattled against her saucer. Sebastian, I beg you to reconsider. Whatever grievance you hold against James, he's been dead these 5 years. Let the past rest. The past won't rest, Eleanor. That's what you've never understood. The past is always with us, demanding its due. He pushed back from the table. Now if you'll excuse me, I have letters to write. One to my own solicitor, one to the police, just in case anything should prevent me from speaking tonight. The silence after he left was profound. Finally, Dr. Fenton cleared his throat. The man's clearly unwell. Perhaps I should examine him. Prescribe something to calm his nerves. An excellent idea, Vera said quickly. Too quickly, Miss Marple thought. I'm afraid Sebastian would refuse, Eleanor said. He's always been stubborn. Even as a young man, when he and James first practiced law together, Sebastian had his own ideas about everything, absolute in his convictions. What was the quarrel about? Miss Marple asked innocently. Between him and your late husband? Eleanor's smile was glacial. Money. Miss Marple. It's always about money, isn't it? Sebastian felt James had mishandled a client's estate. Quite unfounded, of course. But Sebastian could never admit when he was wrong. The afternoon crawled by. Miss Marple settled in the library with her knitting, positioned where she could observe the comings and goings. At 3 o'clock, Charles entered Sebastian's room. She could hear raised voices, though not the words. At 3:30, Vera knocked and was admitted. She emerged 20 minutes later, her face blotched with tears. At 4, Philip tried the door and found it locked. Uncle Sebastian. No response. Probably asleep, Philip muttered, but his eyes were calculating. At 5, Eleanor herself climbed the stairs. Miss Marple, on the pretext of fetching a different skein of wool from her room, observed from the landing as Eleanor knocked softly. Sebastian, please? We must talk before tonight. There are things you don't understand. Things about James. About that time, her voice dropped to a whisper. But Miss Marple, who had excellent hearing for a woman of her years, caught the words, "It will destroy everything. The family, the children's inheritance, everything we've built." Sebastian's voice came muffled through the door. "What you've built on lies, Eleanor. On theft and deception. It wasn't theft. James had every right. James had no rights at all. The Carrington estate should have gone to the daughter, as the will specified. But you both suppressed the codicil, let everyone believe the will was incomplete, and claimed the whole inheritance for your firm's client, who paid you handsomely for your services, didn't he?" Miss Marple's needles had stopped moving. The Carrington estate. Yes, she remembered reading about it. Decades ago. A solicitor named Ashworth had handled the distribution. There had been rumors of irregularities, but nothing proven. That was 40 years ago, Eleanor said. Everyone involved is dead now. Not everyone. I'm alive, Eleanor, and I was party to it. God help me. James convinced me it was legal, that the codicil was invalid. But I've seen a copy now, a real copy, properly witnessed. The daughter should have inherited everything. Instead, she died in poverty while you built this. The contempt in his voice was withering. This monument to respectable criminality. If you reveal this, you'll be implicated too. I know. I welcome it. Better late than never for honesty, don't you think? Eleanor descended the stairs like a woman in a dream. Her eyes passed over Miss Marple without seeing her. Dinner was at 7. A formal affair despite the tensions. The dining room blazed with candles, the table heavy with silver and crystal. The Christmas Eve feast was magnificent. Roast goose, oyster stuffing, 3 kinds of potatoes, Brussels sprouts with chestnuts, and a flaming plum pudding to conclude. Sebastian did not join them. He's fasting, Eleanor announced, in preparation for midnight communion. Really, at his age, it's not wise. But he insists. The lie was transparent, but no one challenged it. They ate in near silence, the scrape of silver on china unnaturally loud. Even Philip had lost his appetite. As Mrs. Yates cleared the dessert plates, the housekeeper murmured something to Eleanor, who paled but nodded. "Mr. Sebastian wishes tea sent to his room, and the letters he's written are to be posted first thing tomorrow morning. He was quite insistent, Mrs. Yates says." "Then he's definitely planning to speak tonight," Charles said heavily. The church bells began to ring at 1:45, calling the household to service. They assembled in the hall, Eleanor in black velvet, Vera in grey silk that washed out her complexion, Catherine in defiant crimson. The men in their evening dress, the vicar in his vestments. "Shouldn't someone fetch Uncle Sebastian?" Catherine asked. Charles knocked on the door once more. Silence. He tried the handle, locked. "Uncle Sebastian, it's time for the service." Nothing. "Perhaps he's fallen asleep," Dr. Fenton suggested. "At his age, after all the excitement." "Break it down," Eleanor said suddenly. "Charles, Dr. Fenton, break down the door." It took 3 attempts. The lock was old but solid. Finally, The wood splintered, and the door crashed open. Sebastian Ashworth sat in the wing chair by the window, facing the door as though he'd been waiting for them. His hands rested on the chair arms, his face composed. On the table beside him sat a teacup, half empty, and several sealed envelopes. He was quite obviously dead. Dr. Fenton rushed forward, fingers seeking a pulse that wasn't there. Good God. He's gone. Must have been his heart. The strain, the excitement. But Miss Marple, standing in the doorway, was looking not at the body, but at the teacup, and at the small golden angel ornament that sat beside it. One of the decorations from the tree downstairs, she thought, an angel watching over the dead. How very curious that Sebastian should have brought it to his room. And how very curious that Eleanor Ashworth, standing frozen in the corridor, was staring at that angel with an expression of absolute horror. Chapter 3. The Angel Falls. The next hours passed in that peculiar suspension of time that follows sudden death. Dr. Fenton confirmed what everyone could see. Sebastian Ashworth had expired, probably no more than an hour ago, given the warmth still present in his extremities. Heart failure, the doctor pronounced with increasing confidence, brought on by age and agitation. The man was 75, overwrought, and had clearly been dwelling on morbid subjects, and Fenton said, accepting the brandy Charles poured him with a shaking hand, not unexpected really. Tragic, of course, especially on Christmas Eve, but not unexpected. They had moved the household to the drawing room, while Mrs. Yates and the upstairs maid tended to Sebastian's body. The Christmas tree still sparkled with candles, though several had guttered out. The golden angel at the apex gazed down with serene indifference. Miss Marple, settled in a corner chair with her knitting, observed the reactions around her. Eleanor sat rigid as stone, her hands folded in her lap with such force that the knuckles showed white. Vera wept quietly into a handkerchief, but her tears seemed more of relief than grief. Charles paced, periodically going to the window, as though help might materialize from the snow-covered darkness. Philip sprawled in an armchair, swirling brandy in his glass. Poor old fellow. Though I suppose if one must go, dying in one's sleep on Christmas Eve has a certain poetic quality. Philip, Catherine rounded on her brother. Have you no decency at all? I have perfect decency. I simply see no point in hypocrisy. We all know Uncle Sebastian was about to cause enormous trouble for this family. Now he's not. It's unfortunate that he's dead, but hardly a tragedy. How can you, Catherine? Eleanor's voice cut through the rising argument. Your brother is merely being honest. Something we might all benefit from. She turned to Dr. Fenton. You're certain it was his heart? Absolutely certain. I've seen dozens of such cases. The symptoms are quite, I think, Miss Marple said gently. We ought to telephone for the police. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to stare at her. The police. Charles's laugh was forced. My dear Miss Marple, Dr. Fenton has just explained. I heard what Dr. Fenton explained. Nevertheless, a man has died who was in perfect health this morning, who had made threats that damaged several people in this household, and who had announced his intention to write to the police himself. Under such circumstances, I believe the police should be informed. This is absurd, Philip said flatly. You're suggesting someone murdered him in a locked room, when Dr. Fenton confirms it was natural causes. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. I'm suggesting nothing, dear. I merely think it proper. The police are always so much happier when they're called promptly, rather than discovering later that there was a delay. She looked at Eleanor. After all, there's nothing to hide, is there? Eleanor Ashworth met her gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. Charles, telephone to the village. Ask for Inspector Craddock. He's handled matters for us before. Tell him we've had a death in the house and request his attendance at his earliest convenience. It took 40 minutes for Inspector Craddock to arrive, brought from his own Christmas Eve by a constable with a motorcar that had chains for the snow. He was a solid, competent-looking man in his 40s, with the air of someone who had seen enough of human nature to be surprised by very little. Miss Marple recognized the type immediately, rather like Inspector Slack back in St. Mary Mead, though perhaps with better manners. The sort of policeman who would do everything by the book, but might miss what wasn't in the book at all. Craddock examined Sebastian's body with Dr. Fenton in attendance, interviewed each member of the household separately in the library, and finally addressed them all in the drawing room, as the clock struck 3 in the morning. Dr. Fenton is convinced this was a natural death, and I see no immediate evidence to contradict him. Ashworth had written letters to his solicitor and was planning to make serious allegations. I'm arranging for the body to be removed to the hospital for a post-mortem examination. Purely routine, you understand. Routine, Eleanor repeated. Yes, of course. In the meantime, I must ask that no one leave the premises until we have the results. The snow has made the roads rather impassable. In any case, so it should pose no hardship. I'll return tomorrow, or rather later today, Christmas Day. He softened slightly. I'm sorry to disrupt your holiday. These things are never pleasant. After he left, taking Sebastian's body and the sealed letters with him, the household dispersed to their rooms. It was nearly 4 in the morning, though no one expected to sleep. Miss Marple, however, did not go to her room. Instead, she waited until the house fell silent, then made her way back to Sebastian's chamber. The door stood open now, the broken lock hanging uselessly. In the grey pre-dawn light, the room looked sad and empty. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes taking in every detail. The teacup first. She bent close without touching it, examining the dregs. Tea certainly, but there was a faint bitter smell beneath the Darjeeling, something that reminded her of almonds. Not arsenic, that was odorless, whatever the novels claimed, but cyanide, perhaps, or something else entirely. The letters Sebastian had written were gone, taken by Inspector Craddock, but there in the wastepaper basket was a crumpled first draft. Miss Marple retrieved it carefully, smoothing the paper. To Inspector Craddock, it began. I write to confess my part in a fraud committed 40 years ago concerning the estate of Colonel Marcus Carrington. The letter went on to detail exactly what Miss Marple had overheard: the suppressed codicil, the diverted inheritance, the poverty and eventual suicide of the rightful heir, a Miss Diana Carrington. But it was the final paragraph that made Miss Marple's breath catch. I am coming forward now, because I have learned that Miss Carrington's daughter, born before her suicide and given up for adoption, still lives and has a rightful claim to what remains of the estate. Moreover, this daughter is known to me, though she does not know her own identity. The truth must be told, and restitution made. I can only pray that God and the law will show mercy both to me and to those I wronged by my silence. Miss Marple folded the letter carefully and placed it in her knitting bag. The golden angel ornament still sat on the table. She picked it up, turning it in her fingers. It was exquisite, clearly old and valuable. But why had Sebastian brought it to his room? Or had someone else brought it? She thought of the angel atop the Christmas tree, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. In the wastepaper basket, she found one more item, a Christmas card, addressed to Sebastian in a feminine hand. The message inside read, "Truth and justice are not always the same thing. Some secrets protect the innocent. Remember mercy this Christmas, a friend." No signature, but the handwriting was educated, confident, a woman's hand, certainly. Miss Marple returned to the main floor, moving silently through the darkened house. She paused in the drawing room, looking up at the Christmas tree. The angel at the top gazed back at her, golden and serene. But when she counted the smaller angel ornaments among the branches, she found something interesting. There were 11 angels, all matching, all clearly part of a set. There should have been 12. The missing angel, she thought, was the one that had sat beside Sebastian's teacup. Someone had taken it from the tree. Someone had placed it in Sebastian's room, perhaps as a message, perhaps as a symbol, an angel of death, watching over murder. As the first grey light of Christmas morning began to filter through the windows, Miss Marple settled herself in the chair where she'd sat the night before and resumed her knitting. She thought of poor young Diana Carrington, driven to suicide by poverty while the Ashworths built their fortune on what should have been hers. She thought of Diana's daughter somewhere in the world, unknowing and unaware. And she thought of the old saying from St. Mary Mead, "The sins of the fathers shall be visited upon the children." Or, she reflected, clicking her needles together with grim purpose, sometimes the children visited the sins themselves. The question was, which child, and how? Chapter 4. Questioning in the Parlor. Christmas morning dawned grey and cold, the snow still falling steadily. No one spoke of attending church services in the village. Sebastian's death had made a mockery of holiday celebration. Instead, the household gathered for a late breakfast, picking at Mrs. Yates' valiant attempt at festivity, kippers, scrambled eggs, fresh bread, and a sadly cheerful arrangement of holly and ivy on the sideboard. Miss Marple, entering the dining room at 9:30, found only Catherine present, staring into a teacup as though it might reveal the future. "Happy Christmas, my dear," Miss Marple said gently. Catherine looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Is it? I rather think Christmas died with Uncle Sebastian last night. Death does cast a shadow. But life continues, you know. It always does." Miss Marple helped herself to toast and sat across from the girl. "You didn't sleep." "How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him sitting there so still, so finished." Catherine shuddered. "I know I said yesterday that I'd never met him before, but that's not quite true. I saw him once, years ago. I was 8 or 9 and he came to the house. There was a terrible argument with Father. Uncle Sebastian kept shouting about conscience and honor, and Father kept saying, 'It's done, it's over, we can't undo it now.' I was listening from the stairs. I didn't understand then. And now I understand that my family's fortune is built on something rotten." Catherine's laugh was bitter. "Rather gothic, isn't it? The sins of the fathers and all that. I suppose Uncle Sebastian thought he was being noble, confessing after all these years. But what good does truth do when it destroys innocent people along with the guilty?" Miss Marple buttered her toast thoughtfully. "You consider yourself innocent. I didn't steal anything. I wasn't even born when it happened." "True, but you've benefited from the theft all your life, haven't you? This house, your education, your position in society, all of it built on the Carrington fortune." Catherine flushed. "That's not my fault." "Fault is a complicated thing. In St. Mary Mead, we had a situation once. A shopkeeper who discovered his father had swindled a widow out of her savings 20 years earlier. The son hadn't known, but once he learned, he made restitution. It bankrupted him, but he said he couldn't keep money that wasn't rightfully his." "How noble," Catherine said dryly. "I suppose you think I should do the same. Give up everything?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that you should tell me about the teacup." Catherine went very still. "What teacup?" "The one beside your uncle's body. Mrs. Yates sent it up at his request, I believe, around 9 o'clock. Who brought it to him?" "I don't know. One of the maids, I suppose." But her eyes shifted away, and Miss Marple knew she was lying. The morning continued with various members of the household appearing and disappearing, like players in a particularly tense drawing-room farce. Vera emerged at 10, pale and trembling, and immediately asked Dr. Fenton for something to calm her nerves. Philip appeared at 10:30, whistling tunelessly and helping himself to a substantial breakfast, despite the circumstances. Charles remained in his study, door closed, periodically audible on the telephone. Eleanor did not appear at all. Miss Marple, on the pretext of offering condolences, knocked on Eleanor's bedroom door shortly before noon. "Come," came the flat voice. Eleanor sat at her dressing table, still in her nightgown, staring at her reflection without seeming to see it. She looked every one of her 72 years this morning. The careful grooming and deportment, stripped away by grief or shock or something else entirely. "My dear," Miss Marple said gently, "might I bring you something? Tea, perhaps? Toast? How kind." Eleanor's voice was mechanical. "But I couldn't eat. My stomach is quite uncertain. The shock, of course. It's perfectly natural." Miss Marple settled herself in the chair by the window, her knitting emerging from her bag as though by magic. "I lost my own brother years ago, quite suddenly. I remember that feeling of unreality, as though the world had shifted, and wouldn't shift back. Sebastian was my brother-in-law, not my brother. Still, a connection, a tie to the past." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "You and he must have been close once when you and your husband first married." "We were never close. Sebastian was always difficult, judgmental. He had these rigid ideas about right and wrong, as though life were that simple. And yet he was your husband's partner. They must have agreed on fundamental things." Eleanor's hands clenched on the edge of the dressing table. "James was a good man, whatever Sebastian said, whatever he believed. James was a good man who did what he thought was right." About the Carrington estate, the silence stretched between them. Finally, Eleanor turned to look at Miss Marple directly. "You heard us yesterday, in the corridor. I'm afraid my hearing is quite sharp for someone my age. A curse, really. One overhears all sorts of things. One shouldn't. Then you know what Sebastian was threatening to reveal. I know what he believed about the estate. Whether it's true is another matter entirely. Eleanor rose and went to the window, looking out at the snow. It's true, all of it. There was a codicil to Colonel Carrington's will, leaving everything to his illegitimate daughter Diana. James and Sebastian handled the estate. They should have honored the codicil, but James argued that Diana was unsuitable. She was only 19, involved with an unsuitable man, likely to waste the fortune. He convinced Sebastian that they should delay things, give Diana an allowance, and claim the codicil was being disputed. But the delay became permanent. Diana killed herself 6 months later, drowned herself in the Thames. After that, with no heir, the estate was distributed according to the original will to Colonel Carrington's nephew, who was the firm's client. The nephew paid handsomely for their services. That money became the foundation of the Ashworth fortune. Miss Marple's needles never paused, and Diana's daughter, Eleanor, spun around. How did you? Sebastian's letter mentioned her, the one Inspector Craddock took. I assume there was a draft? Diana was pregnant when she died. The child was born posthumously, delivered by surgery, a girl. She was given to an orphanage, adopted immediately. We never knew what became of her, but Sebastian knew. Sebastian claimed to know. He said he'd found her, that she had a right to what remains of the Carrington estate, and that he intended to tell her the truth about her mother and her inheritance. A considerable sum, I imagine, even after 40 years of inflation and investment. Yes, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Enough, Miss Marple observed, to destroy your family's position entirely. Enough to ruin us. Yes, the scandal alone would be devastating. And if the Carrington heir sued for restitution, Eleanor's voice broke. Everything would be gone. The house, the money, Charles's business ventures, the children's futures, everything. So Sebastian's death was rather convenient. Eleanor's eyes flashed. If you're suggesting I murdered him. I'm not suggesting anything, dear. Merely observing. Miss Marple examined her knitting critically. Though I must say, the timing is remarkable. A few hours before he planned to reveal everything, and his heart simply gives out, almost providential. One might say, Dr. Fenton confirmed it was natural causes. Dr. Fenton confirmed. It appeared to be natural causes. The post-mortem will tell us more. Miss Marple looked up, her eyes sharp. Tell me about the golden angel. Eleanor blinked at the apparent non sequitur. The angel, the small ornament found beside Sebastian's teacup. It came from the Christmas tree, I believe, one of a set of 12. They were my mother-in-law's. German angels, quite old. We've used them on the tree for decades. Why would Sebastian have one in his room? I have no idea. Perhaps he took it as, I don't know, a memento? A symbol of some kind. But Eleanor's confusion seemed genuine, and Miss Marple filed away that interesting fact. If Eleanor hadn't placed the angel there, and Sebastian hadn't taken it himself, then someone else had brought it to his room. Someone who wanted to leave a message. After lunch, a grim affair of cold meats that no one ate with any enthusiasm, Miss Marple found Vera Ashworth in the conservatory, dead-heading geraniums with fierce concentration. They'll bloom again in spring, Vera said, without looking up. If we're still here in spring, if we're not in prison or poorhouses. You're thinking of what Sebastian meant to reveal. Aren't we all? Vera's hands shook as she snipped a brown bloom. Charles will lose everything. His investments, his reputation. Everything depends on the Ashworth name being solid, respectable. And she trailed off. You consulted with Sebastian yesterday about your late father's estate, I believe Mrs. Ashworth said. Vera's laugh was harsh. My late father's non-existent estate. Father died last year, you see, and left enormous debts. Gambling debts, mostly. Charles has been paying them off quietly to avoid scandal. We're practically bankrupt already. If the Carrington scandal came out, if Charles faced legal action, we'd have nothing. Desperate circumstances. Quite desperate. Havra set down her shears and turned to face Miss Marple. You think I killed him, don't you? You think I poisoned his tea to protect my husband and myself? Did you? No, though God help me. I'm glad he's dead. Does that shock you, Miss Marple? I'm glad. I prayed last night that he would die before he could speak, and my prayers were answered. Perhaps I should feel guilty, but I don't. I feel relieved. Prayers and poison are rather different things, are they? Both achieve the same end. Vera picked up her shears again. Ask yourself this, Miss Marple, who had the most to lose from Sebastian's revelations. All of us, certainly. But who had the most to gain from his death? Who benefits most from his silence? You tell me. But Vera only smiled sadly and returned to her geraniums. Miss Marple found Philip in the billiards room, practicing shots with the dedication of someone avoiding thought. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was more genuine than she'd yet seen from him. Come to accuse me, Miss Marple? Everyone seems to think I'm the obvious suspect. The wastrel nephew, gambling debts, expensive tastes, all very gothic. Do you have gambling debts? Certainly. Nothing I can't manage, though. Unlike poor Vera's father, I know when to stop. He lined up another shot, sank it cleanly. But if the Ashworth fortune collapsed, my creditors would become rather insistent rather quickly. So yes, I had motive. The question is whether I had means and opportunity. And did you? Opportunity, certainly. I went to his room yesterday afternoon, around 4, knocked on the door, got no answer, but the door was locked, so I couldn't get in. He paused. Or could I? There's a connecting door between his room and the old nursery next door. I used to play in that nursery as a child. I know every secret of this house. You're remarkably forthcoming. Why not? The police will discover it all anyway. I'd rather control the narrative. He set down his cue. Here's what I'll tell them. Yes, I had motive. Yes, I had opportunity. But I didn't kill him. I wanted to, when he threatened to destroy our family. I fantasized about throttling him. But I didn't. I'm not brave enough for murder, Miss Marple. I'm a coward, you see. I take the easy way, gambling, drinking, charming people into giving me money. Murder is far too definitive for someone like me. And yet someone killed him. Did they? Dr. Fenton seems convinced it was his heart. Dr. Fenton, Miss Marple said gently, drinks too much to be entirely reliable. Philip's expression shifted to something harder. Careful, Miss Marple. Marcus Fenton has been a friend to this family for 30 years. He delivered both Catherine and me, saw us through every childhood illness. He would never what? Lie to protect the family? Overlook suspicious circumstances? Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked. In St. Mary Mead we had a doctor who protected his patients' reputations at the expense of truth. It ended badly. She left Philip staring after her and went in search of the one person she hadn't yet properly questioned. Mrs. Yates was in her sitting room off the kitchen, accounts books spread before her. The housekeeper looked up as Miss Marple entered, and her expression was wary. Miss Marple, what can I do for you? I'm hoping you can clarify a small matter. The tea that was sent to Mr. Sebastian's room last night. Who prepared it? I did, madam. He rang down at 9 o'clock, asked for tea. I made it myself, as the kitchen maids were busy with dinner preparations. And who took it up to him? Mrs. Yates hesitated. Miss Catherine. She offered to take it, said she wanted to wish her uncle good night properly. The first lie confirmed. Catherine had taken the tea. Did anyone else visit his room after that? Mrs. Ashworth went up around 9:30. Mrs. Vera at 10. Mr. Charles tried the door at 10:30, but it was locked. Mr. Philip went up just before 11, and Dr. Fenton knocked around 11:30, offered to check on Mr. Sebastian's health, but was refused entry. Quite a parade. A man who'd threatened to destroy a family. Madam, people wanted to talk him out of it, or silence him permanently. Mrs. Yates's face hardened. I've served this family 30 years, Miss Marple. I've seen them through scandal and sorrow, births and deaths. They're good people. Flawed, yes, but who isn't? Whatever happened to Mr. Sebastian? I'm sure it was God's will. God's will, Miss Marple repeated. Or someone's careful planning. As she left the kitchen, she almost collided with Mr. Thornley, the vicar, arriving through the servants' entrance. He was dusted with snow, his face pinched with cold and something else, fear perhaps, or guilt. Mr. Thornley, out visiting parishioners on Christmas Day. I've been walking, he said, thinking and praying, trying to understand God's purpose in all this. And have you understood it? His smile was bitter. Sebastian came to me for guidance, and I told him to speak the truth no matter the cost. Now he's dead, and I feel complicit. If I'd counselled mercy instead of justice, would he still be alive? That depends, Miss Marple said, on whether God or poison stopped his heart. Chapter 5. The pattern emerges. Inspector Craddock returned at 4 o'clock Christmas afternoon, stamping snow from his boots and carrying the grim efficiency of bad news with him. The household gathered in the drawing room. The Christmas tree's candles had not been relit, and the room felt dim and cold despite the blazing fire. The golden angel at the tree's apex cast strange shadows in the firelight. "The post-mortem results are preliminary," Craddock began, "but conclusive enough. Mr. Sebastian Ashworth did not die of natural causes. He was poisoned." The silence was absolute. Then Vera made a small whimpering sound, and Charles put his arm around her shoulders. "Poisoned," Eleanor repeated. Her voice was utterly flat. "Cyanide, to be precise. A substantial dose, administered in his tea. Death would have occurred within minutes, perhaps 10 or 15 at most. He would have felt chest pain, difficulty breathing, confusion, then unconsciousness, and death." "My God," Dr. Fenton said. He'd gone very pale. "I should have seen it. The color of his lips, the smell. I should have recognized the signs." "Cyanide poisoning can mimic heart failure to the casual observer," Craddock said, not unkindly. "Especially when one expects to see natural death. That's why we do post-mortems in suspicious circumstances." "Suspicious," Philip said. "I suppose we're all suspects now." "I'm afraid so. Everyone in this house had motive. Mr. Ashworth's planned revelations would have damaged you all. Everyone had opportunity. He was alone in his room from 9 o'clock until midnight. And the means cyanide is readily available to anyone with access to photographic chemicals, rat poison, or certain industrial processes. We have rat poison in the stables," Charles said heavily. "For the vermin, anyone could have accessed it, which makes my job rather more difficult." Craddock pulled out his notebook. "I'll need to interview each of you again more thoroughly this time. Miss Marple. Perhaps we might begin with you. As an outside observer, you may have noticed things the family overlooked." They adjourned to the library. Miss Marple, Inspector Craddock, and a constable taking notes. Craddock settled himself behind the desk with the air of a man preparing for a long evening. "Now then, Miss Marple, you suggested last night that we should be called why? Call it an old woman's intuition, Inspector, or perhaps experience. I've lived in St. Mary Mead for 70 years, and I've observed that when people make dramatic announcements about revealing secrets, and then die before they can speak, it's rarely coincidental. You suspected murder immediately. I suspected the possibility should be investigated. There's a difference." "Quite right. Now walk me through what you observed yesterday." Miss Marple did so, methodically and without embellishment. She described the tensions at breakfast, the conversations she'd overheard, the parade of visitors to Sebastian's room. She mentioned the locked door, the sealed letters, the golden angel beside the teacup. "This angel ornament," Craddock said. "You believe it's significant? It's one of 12 from the Christmas tree. Someone removed it and placed it in Sebastian's room. That suggests deliberation, not impulse. The angel is symbol judgment, perhaps, or warning. Who had access to the tree? Anyone in the household. It stands in the drawing room, which is never locked. And the tea? Who handled it? Mrs. Yates prepared it. Catherine Ashworth delivered it to Sebastian's room at approximately 9 o'clock. Craddock's eyebrow rose. The family has been somewhat less specific about that detail. I imagine they're protecting Catherine. She's young and impulsive, and she delivered the poisoned tea. But that doesn't necessarily make her the poisoner. Explain. The teacup was taken from the kitchen by Catherine. Yes, but between the kitchen and Sebastian's room, she could have been intercepted by anyone. Someone could have added the poison while Catherine was climbing the stairs or waiting in the corridor. Or, Miss Marple paused. Considering, the poison could have been in the cup already, placed there by someone who knew Sebastian would request tea. Mrs. Yates, possible, though I think not. Mrs. Yates is fiercely loyal to the family, but she's also fundamentally honest. Poisoning doesn't suit her character. You're quite the psychologist, Miss Marple. Merely observant, Inspector. I've found that people are remarkably consistent in their behaviors. They may lie about their actions, but their essential natures remain constant. Over the next 3 hours, Craddock interviewed the entire household. Miss Marple, knitting in her corner, was allowed to remain, a courtesy to her age and apparent harmlessness, though she suspected Craddock was shrewder than he appeared, and wanted her observations. Catherine went first, tearful and defensive. Yes, she'd taken the tea to Uncle Sebastian. No, she hadn't added anything to it. She'd knocked, he'd opened the door, she'd handed him the cup, and he'd thanked her. The whole interaction took less than a minute. She'd noticed nothing unusual except, what, Miss Ashworth? The angel, the golden ornament. It was sitting on his table already when I gave him the tea. I remember noticing it and thinking it odd. Why odd? Because Uncle Sebastian wasn't the sentimental type. He wouldn't have taken a Christmas ornament to his room. Someone else must have placed it there. Who had been in his room before you? I don't know. Mother and Vera both visited earlier in the evening, and Philip tried the door. Any of them could have left it. Vera was next, admitting through tears that yes, she'd gone to Sebastian's room at 10 o'clock, pleading with him to reconsider. He'd been drinking tea when she arrived. The cup was half empty. He'd been kind but firm. No, she hadn't touched his tea. Yes, she'd noticed the golden angel. No, she hadn't placed it there. Did Mr. Ashworth mention the angel? Craddock asked. He said, Vera's voice caught. He said someone had given it to him as a reminder. An angel of judgment, he called it. He seemed to find it grimly amusing. Eleanor's testimony was precise and controlled. She'd visited Sebastian at 9:30, before Catherine delivered the tea. They'd argued in the corridor. She didn't deny it. He'd refused to see her, refused to discuss matters further. When she'd finally convinced him to open the door, she'd seen the angel on his table and asked about it. What did he say? He said it was a gift from someone with a conscience, someone who understood about angels and judgment. Did he name this person? No. Charles had tried the door at 10:30 and found it locked. Philip had knocked at 11, also finding it locked. Dr. Fenton had attempted to check on Sebastian's health at 11:30, concerned about the old man's agitation, but had been firmly rebuffed. I heard him moving about in there, Fenton said. I could tell he was alive, and apparently well. If I'd known, if I'd suspected. You couldn't have known, Doctor, Craddock said, but his eyes were thoughtful. It was nearly 8 o'clock when Craddock finally sat back, reviewing his notes. So what we have is this. The poison was likely in the tea when Catherine delivered it at 9 o'clock. The angel was already in the room, placed there by an unknown person at an unknown time, possibly as early as afternoon. Sebastian drank enough of the tea to die from it, probably around 11:30, given the timeline of the locked door and the symptoms. He was dead by the time the household went to fetch him for midnight service. A very narrow window, Miss Marple observed. Indeed, and no clear suspect. Everyone had motive, several people had opportunity, and anyone could have obtained the cyanide. He rubbed his eyes wearily. There's something I'm missing, some pattern I'm not seeing. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. Inspector, have you considered that this might not be about the Carrington estate at all? What else could it be about? Family secrets are like Russian dolls, Inspector. There's always another secret inside the first one. She set down her knitting. Sebastian said he knew the identity of Diana Carrington's daughter. He said she was known to him. That suggests someone in his acquaintance, possibly someone in this very house. The room seemed to grow colder. Craddock leaned forward. You're suggesting that one of the Ashworths is actually Diana Carrington's child. I'm suggesting it's a possibility worth considering. Diana died 40 years ago. Her daughter would be 40 now, or thereabouts. Vera is 42. Mrs. Yates is 51, but she could have lied about her age when seeking employment. Even Catherine could be adopted, rather than Charles and Eleanor's natural daughter. She's 20, but adoption records can be falsified. That would mean the Carrington heir has been living in this house, benefiting from the stolen fortune, all unknowing. And if Sebastian planned to reveal that truth, to give the inheritance to its rightful owner, Miss Marple paused. How would you feel, Inspector, if you discovered your entire life was built on theft from yourself? I'd be devastated. Furious. Furious enough to kill the messenger? Or, Miss Marple's eyes grew distant. Grateful enough to kill him before he could speak? If the heir didn't want the truth known, if she preferred her current life to a scandal and a contested fortune, she might choose murder over revelation. This is speculation. Most detection begins with speculation, Inspector. But I think I can offer you something more concrete. From her knitting bag, Miss Marple withdrew the crumpled letter she'd found in Sebastian's wastepaper basket. I took the liberty of retrieving this earlier. It's a draft of Sebastian's letter to you, more detailed than the final version. Craddock read it quickly, his expression darkening. You removed evidence from a crime scene. I'm an old woman, Inspector. I get confused sometimes. Her smile was absolutely guileless. But now you have it, and you can see what I saw. Sebastian knew the identity of Diana Carrington's daughter. The question is, who else knew? Before Craddock could respond, there was a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, and then the library door burst open. Philip stood there breathing hard, his face flushed with triumph or drink or both. Inspector, you'll want to see this. I've been going through Uncle Sebastian's things with your permission, of course, and I found his notebook, his investigative notes about the Carrington case. He laid a leather-bound journal on the desk. Craddock opened it carefully, scanning the pages of cramped handwriting, dates, names, legal references, and there, on the final page, underlined 3 times, Diana Carrington's daughter, identity confirmed, will inform her Christmas Eve before revelation to family. She deserves to know the truth about herself before it becomes public. Have written to her, requested private meeting at 8 p.m. in my room. Will tell her everything, her mother's tragedy, her rightful inheritance, her true identity. Pray she has the strength to bear it. 8 o'clock. 1 hour before the poisoned tea was delivered. Good God, Craddock breathed. He told her. He told the Carrington heir who she was. And 1 hour later he was dead. Which means, Miss Marple said quietly, the murderer is the victim. The room fell utterly silent as the implication sank in. The heir had killed Sebastian to prevent him from telling anyone else. But which one? Philip said. Which woman in this house is Diana Carrington's daughter? Miss Marple picked up her knitting once more, her expression serene. I believe, Inspector, that we should examine the angel. Chapter 6. Secrets Beneath the Snow. Christmas night deepened into a Boxing Day that felt more like purgatory than holiday. Inspector Craddock had forbidden anyone to leave the house, posting a constable at each door. The snow continued falling, cutting Winterbourne Manor off from the village, from help, from the ordinary world of laws and justice. Miss Marple sat in the conservatory, examining the golden angel ornament through her spectacles. It was exquisite work, German craftsmanship from the last century. Delicate filigree wings, a porcelain face with painted features, a gilt halo. On the base, barely visible, was an inscription in Gothic script. Can you read it? Inspector Craddock asked, hovering at her shoulder. My German is rusty, but I believe it says, Wahrheit und Gericht, truth and judgment. Miss Marple turned the angel slowly in her hands. How very appropriate, and how very deliberate. You think the killer chose this specific angel as a message? I think the killer chose it because it had meaning. Perhaps it was a favourite of the old Mrs. Ashworth's Eleanor's mother-in-law, who brought these from Germany. Perhaps it represented something to the person who placed it in Sebastian's room. But what? Miss Marple set the angel down carefully. That's what we must discover. Inspector, I wonder if you might arrange for me to speak with each of the women separately. Not formal interviews, merely conversation. Sometimes people reveal more when they're not being officially questioned. Craddock considered this, then nodded. I'll arrange it. Though I should warn you, Miss Marple, obstruction of justice is a serious crime. Yes, I know. Her smile was gentle, but I promise you, Inspector, I want the truth as much as you do, perhaps more. She began with Mrs. Yates, inviting the housekeeper to join her for tea in the morning room. The older woman came stiffly, suspicion evident in every line of her body. I suppose you think I did it, Mrs. Yates said, without preamble. 30 years of service, and now I'm suspected of murder. I don't think anything yet. I'm simply trying to understand. Miss Marple poured tea with steady hands. You've been with the family since before Charles was born, I believe. Since I was 21, my first position as housekeeper, Mrs. Ashworth, the elder Mrs. Ashworth, took a chance on me despite my youth. You must have been grateful. I was devoted to her. She was a kind woman, far kinder than her daughter-in-law. Mrs. Yates accepted the teacup but didn't drink. She died when Mr. Charles was 10 cancer. It was a terrible time. And the angel ornaments, were they special to her? Mrs. Yates's expression softened. She brought them from her childhood home in Bavaria. Each Christmas she'd place them on the tree herself. Wouldn't let anyone else touch them. She said they represented the 12 virtues: faith, hope, charity, and so on. Truth was her favourite. She'd always place that one at the front of the tree where she could see it. Truth and judgment, Miss Marple murmured. Did you know about the Carrington case? The housekeeper's hands tightened on her cup. I knew there'd been some trouble between Mr. James and his brother, arguments about a legal matter. But the details, she trailed off. Mrs. Yates, I'm going to ask you a very personal question, and I hope you'll forgive me. Were you adopted? The teacup rattled against the saucer. How did you? Yes. Yes, I was adopted as an infant. The orphanage in London told my parents I'd been born to an unwed mother who died in childbirth. When were you born? January 1885. Too early. Diana Carrington had died in 1895. Mrs. Yates couldn't be the heir, but the housekeeper's face had gone ashen. You think I'm this Carrington woman's daughter? You think I killed Mr. Sebastian to prevent him revealing, but I'm not. I can't be. The dates don't match. No, Miss Marple said gently. You're not, but I needed to know if you'd been adopted. Forgive me for distressing you. Next came Vera, who entered the morning room with the wary air of a trapped animal. She'd aged a decade in the past 2 days, her face haggard, her hands shaking. Charles says I'm not to speak to you without a solicitor present, she said. But I don't care anymore. I'm so tired of secrets. Then let's have no more secrets. Miss Marple offered tea, which Vera accepted gratefully. Tell me about your family, your parents. My father was a gambler and a drunk. My mother died when I was young. I barely remember her. Father raised me, if you can call it that. Mostly I raised myself. Vera's voice was bitter. He was obsessed with respectability, with marrying me well. When Charles showed interest, Father practically threw me at him. I was 19. Charles was 30. I thought it was love. But now I wonder if Father knew something, had some hold over the Ashworths that made them agree to the match. What year were you born? 1895. December 1895. Vera paused, realization dawning in her eyes. That's 9 months after Diana Carrington died. You think I'm her daughter, are you? I don't know. I never questioned my birth. Father said my mother died of fever when I was 3, but I have no memories of her, no photographs. He refused to speak of her. Vera set down her cup with shaking hands. Sebastian asked me about my adoption papers yesterday. I told him I didn't have any, that Father had destroyed them. He looked at me so strangely, with such pity. He said, You don't know, do you? You truly don't know. What did he mean? I think he meant that you are Diana Carrington's daughter, that your father, the man who raised you, was somehow connected to the Carringtons, perhaps a servant or employee, that he took the baby from the orphanage, raised you as his own, and when you came of age engineered your marriage into the Ashworth family, whether as revenge or for profit. I can't yet say. Vera's face crumpled. Then everything I am, everything I've believed about myself, it's all a lie, and I'm married to the family that stole my inheritance, killed my mother as surely as if they'd pushed her into the Thames themselves. Did Sebastian tell you this yesterday? No. He said he wanted to investigate further before causing me pain. He said he'd tell me the truth on Christmas Eve. After he'd spoken to the family, a sob escaped her. Don't you see? If I'd known earlier I could have stopped him. But I didn't know. I swear I didn't know until just now. Miss Marple believed her. Vera's shock was too genuine, her grief too raw. She wasn't the killer, which left Catherine. The young woman came reluctantly, summoned by Mrs. Yates. She looked exhausted, her crimson dress from Christmas Eve replaced by plain black wool, her hair unpinned and falling around her shoulders. I know what you're going to ask, Catherine said before Miss Marple could speak. Am I adopted? And the answer is yes. The room seemed to hold its breath. Mother and father couldn't have children. Father had mumps as a young man. It left him sterile. They adopted me as a newborn from a private agency in London. They never told me, but I found the papers when I was 16, hidden in Mother's desk. We had a terrible row. She said I was never to speak of it, that it didn't matter, that I was an Ashworth in every way that counted. What year were you born? 1915. 20 years ago last month. Catherine's smile was bleak. Too late to be Diana Carrington's daughter, obviously. That child would be 40 now. So you see, I'm not your heir, no. Miss Marple agreed. You're not. But there was something in Catherine's eyes, a knowledge, a fear, that made Miss Marple pause. You know who is, though, don't you? Catherine looked away. I have suspicions. Tell me, why should I? So you can hand her over to the police? So she can be arrested for murder? So the truth can be known? That's what Sebastian wanted. Truth and judgment. Sebastian wanted to destroy this family. He didn't care who got hurt, who suffered. He just wanted his precious conscience cleared. Catherine's voice rose. Well, he's dead now, and maybe that's justice too. Maybe the angel he spoke of wasn't meant to judge us. Maybe it was meant to judge him. Before Miss Marple could respond, the door burst open. Philip stood there, wild-eyed. Inspector, you need to come quickly. It's Mother. Eleanor, she's collapsed in her room. Dr. Fenton says it's her heart. But I think she's taken something. They raced up the stairs, Miss Marple moving with surprising speed for a woman her age. Eleanor's bedroom door stood open. The lady of the house lay on her bed, breathing in shallow gasps, her face grey. Dr. Fenton knelt beside her, checking her pulse. On the bedside table sat a glass of water and an empty pill bottle. Digitalis, Fenton said grimly. Her heart medication. She's taken the entire bottle. Suicide, Craddock demanded. Or murder made to look like suicide. The symptoms are similar to heart failure, which is what she'd die of anyway if she overdosed on Digitalis. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. She saw them gathered around her bed and smiled faintly. Too late, she whispered. Too late to stop it now. Stop what? Craddock leaned close. Mrs. Ashworth, if you've been poisoned, if someone did this to you. No one did anything to me. I did it myself. Her voice was barely audible. Can't face it. The scandal, the ruin. Better this way, quicker. Mrs. Ashworth, please. But her eyes had fixed on something past Craddock's shoulder. Miss Marple turned to see Catherine standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Tell her, Eleanor whispered. Tell Catherine. She should know. She deserves to know. Mother, please don't. Catherine started forward, but Philip held her back. Tell her about her grandmother, about Diana. Eleanor's breathing was becoming more labored. Tell her that I'm sorry. So sorry, James and I, we didn't know. Didn't know Diana was pregnant. If we'd known, might have been different. What about my grandmother? Catherine's voice cracked. Mother, what are you saying? Eleanor's hand reached out, trembling. Your real mother was Diana Carrington's daughter. She gave you up for adoption, just as her mother gave her up. The cycle, repeating. The room spun. Miss Marple gripped the bedpost for support as the pieces finally clicked into place. Catherine wasn't Diana Carrington's daughter. Catherine was Diana Carrington's granddaughter, which meant her mother, the woman who'd given birth to her and given her up for adoption, was the true Carrington heir. And that woman was somewhere in this house. Who? Catherine's voice was a scream. Who is my mother? But Eleanor's eyes had closed. Dr. Fenton checked her pulse, then looked up, shaking his head. She's unconscious. I need to induce vomiting. Try to purge the digitalicy. Inspector, I need my bag from downstairs. And I need help immediately. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Craddock and Charles ran for supplies. Philip stood frozen, staring at his mother's still form. Catherine collapsed into a chair, sobbing, and Miss Marple, standing quietly in the corner, finally understood everything. The angel of truth and judgment, the heir who'd killed to keep her secret, and the twisted family tree that had brought them all to this moment. She slipped from the room, down the corridor, moving with purpose now. She knew where to find the last piece of the puzzle. The conservatory was dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through the glass roof. Among the geraniums and ferns, someone stood with her back to the door. I've been expecting you, the woman said, without turning. I wondered when you'd work it out. Miss Marple stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Hello, Mrs. Yates, she said quietly. Or should I say, Miss Carrington. Chapter 7. The Test. The housekeeper turned slowly, and in the moonlight filtering through the conservatory glass, her face looked carved from ice. Gone was the deferential servant, the loyal retainer of 30 years. In her place stood a woman who had lived a lifetime bearing secrets. Not Mrs. Yates, she said. Never really Mrs. Yates. That was a borrowed name, a stolen identity. My real name is Diana Margaret Carrington. I'm 51 years old, not 51. I was born in June 1885, not January. Another lie among so many. Miss Marple moved to the gardening bench and sat down carefully. Her knitting emerged from her bag, the pale blue cardigan for her great-nephew's child, growing longer now, almost complete. "The dates troubled me," she said. "You told me you were born in January 1885, but Diana Carrington died in September 1895, having given birth posthumously. If you were born in June 1885, you'd have been 3 months old when your mother died, too young to remember her, but old enough to exist before her death. Very clever." Mrs. Yates, Diana, moved among the plants, her fingers touching leaves absently. I wondered if anyone would notice. But people rarely question what's written in employment records, do they? I changed my birth date when I created my new identity, made myself younger, more employable. Who checks such things? Sebastian did. He was a solicitor, trained to notice discrepancies. When did he confront you? Christmas Eve afternoon. He came to my sitting room with his files, his evidence, birth records from the hospital where my mother died, hospital records of a baby girl delivered by surgery, adoption papers from the orphanage. He traced me through the woman who raised me, not my mother, but a servant in my father's household who took pity on me. She's dead now, but Sebastian found her diary, and he told you everything. Everything. That Colonel Carrington was my grandfather, that my mother died not knowing I'd survived, thinking I'd died with her. That James and Eleanor Ashworth had suppressed the will, stolen my inheritance, let my mother die in poverty while they prospered on what should have been hers. Diana's voice was utterly flat. He told me I was the rightful heir to hundreds of thousands of pounds, that I'd served the family who destroyed my mother for 30 years, cleaned their house, managed their servants, watched them spend money that was mine by right. How did you feel? The question hung in the cold air. Diana laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How did I feel? Privet rage. Miss Marple. Privateur rage. I wanted to burn this house to the ground, to destroy them as they'd destroyed my mother. But Sebastian said no, said we'd do it legally, expose them publicly, take everything through the courts. He said I deserved justice. But you didn't want justice. No. Diana met her eyes. I wanted revenge. And I wanted my life back. The life I'd built, the identity I'd created. I'm Mrs. Yates, respected housekeeper, pillar of the servants' hall. I'm not Diana Carrington, illegitimate daughter of a suicide, raised in an orphanage, clawing my way to respectability through lies and forged papers. I won't be her. I won't let Sebastian make me be her. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. So you killed him. I killed him. The admission came easily, almost with relief. I brought him the angel, truth and judgment, old Mrs. Ashworth's favourite. I told him it was a reminder that truth isn't always merciful, that judgment cuts both ways. He thought I was being philosophical. He didn't realize I was saying goodbye. The cyanide was in the tea when you prepared it, from the rat poison in the stables. I ground it to powder, mixed it with sugar. When Sebastian rang for tea, I knew it was my chance. Catherine offered to take it up. Sweet, impulsive Catherine. I let her. Better that way, muddies the waters. But the poison was already in the cup, in the bottom, covered with sugar. When I poured the hot tea, it dissolved immediately. Sebastian never knew. He drank it, thinking about his conscience, his redemption. He died thinking he'd done the right thing. Miss Marple looked up from her knitting. Ha! And Catherine? Eleanor's revelation about her grandmother. Diana's face twisted. Catherine is my daughter. I was 19 in service at a great house, seduced by the master's son. When I found myself with child, I was dismissed without references. I went to a home for unwed mothers, gave birth, and gave her up for adoption immediately. I couldn't care for her. I could barely care for myself. And by terrible chance, the Ashworths adopted her. Not chance, cruelty. The agency the Ashworths used often placed children with wealthy families. I didn't know for years that my own daughter was living in the house where I worked. When I finally learnt the truth, saw the adoption papers in Eleanor's desk one day while cleaning, I wanted to scream. My daughter, raised by the family that destroyed my mother, my grandmother. The pattern repeating across generations. Did Catherine know? No. I never told her. What could I say? I'm your mother, and I've been serving you tea and making your bed for 20 years? How do you explain that kind of deception? Miss Marple set down her knitting. What about Eleanor? Did you poison her too? Diana shook her head. Eleanor poisoned herself. She knew I'd killed Sebastian. She'd seen me going into his room earlier in the evening, seen me take the angel from the tree. She suspected the truth about my identity from things Sebastian had said. When the post-mortem confirmed murder, she knew it was only a matter of time before the police discovered everything. She couldn't face the scandal, the ruin, so she took her own way out. How convenient for you, isn't it? Diana's smile was terrible. One less Ashworth to face judgment. Though I'd have preferred her to live, to suffer public disgrace, to lose everything, as my mother lost everything. And now? The police know about the poison. They'll arrest someone soon. Let them arrest me. I'm ready. Diana sank onto a bench among the ferns. I've had 30 years of servitude, of bowing and scraping, of watching them live on blood money. I've had 30 years of raising my own daughter as a stranger. I'm tired, Miss Marple. So very tired. There's still time. You could flee, try to escape before Inspector Craddock. No? Diana's voice was firm. I won't run. I won't spend what's left of my life hiding from justice. Better to face it, confess. Let the world know what the Ashworths did, even if I hang for it. The truth will come out. That's what matters now. Truth. Miss Marple studied the woman before her. Daughter, mother, grandmother, to 3 generations of grief. Victim and murderer, both. The cycle of harm stretching back 40 years, claiming new lives with each revolution. I need you to do something, Diana said quietly. Tell Catherine. Tell her who I am, why I did it. She deserves to know her mother, even if her mother is a murderer. And tell her, her voice broke. Tell her, I'm sorry. For everything. For giving her up. For killing in her house. For being too weak and too angry to break the cycle. You can tell her yourself. No, she wouldn't want to hear it from me. Better coming from you. Neutral, kind, understanding. You remind me of old Mrs. Ashworth, actually. The only one of them who was ever decent to me. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. Inspector Craddock's voice calling for Miss Marple. Diana rose, smoothing her black dress, composing her face back into the mask of the perfect housekeeper. I'm ready, she said. Let's get this over with. Miss Marple accompanied her into the hallway, where Craddock stood with 2 constables. His face was grim. Miss Marple, I've been looking for you. We've found. He stopped, seeing Diana. Mrs. Yates, I need you to come with me, please. We have some questions. I'm sure you do, Inspector. Diana's voice was perfectly calm. But let me save you some time. I killed Sebastian Ashworth. I poisoned his tea with cyanide. I did it to prevent him from revealing my identity and claiming an inheritance that would destroy the life I've built. I'm Diana Carrington's daughter, the heir to the Carrington estate, and I've served this family for 30 years not knowing who I was. Craddock stared at her, stunned. Mrs. Yates, my name is Diana Margaret Carrington, and I'm ready to confess everything. As the constables moved forward to arrest her, Diana turned back to Miss Marple. The cardigan you're knitting. It's beautiful. Is it for your family? My great-nephew's first child. A boy, due in the spring. Diana smiled sadly. How wonderful, to knit for a child you'll know, watch grow, be part of their life. I never had that with Catherine. I made her baby clothes before she was born. Beautiful things. Then I gave them away with her. I've never knit anything since. It's never too late, Miss Marple said gently. Even from prison you could knit for your daughter, for your grandchild. Acts of love transcend walls. Perhaps. Diana held out her wrists for the handcuffs. But some walls are too high to cross, Miss Marple. Some truths come too late. They led her away, the perfect housekeeper, with her perfect posture, disappearing into the winter night that was finally mercifully coming to an end. Miss Marple stood alone in the corridor, holding her knitting, watching the snow fall outside the window. She thought of Diana Carrington the elder, drowning herself in the Thames at 19, pregnant and destitute. She thought of Diana Carrington the younger, giving up her baby at 19, desperate and alone. She thought of Catherine, learning at 20 that her whole life was built on secrets and lies. 3 generations of women, each one abandoned, each one surviving as best she could. Such a waste, she murmured to no one. Such a terrible, terrible waste. Tomorrow she would tell Catherine everything. Tomorrow there would be statements to give, evidence to present, the machinery of justice grinding into motion. But tonight, on this Boxing Day that had become a day of reckoning, Miss Marple simply stood and knitted, each stitch a small act of creation in the face of so much destruction. The angel of truth and judgment had done its work. Now came the long, painful aftermath. Chapter 8. The Revelation. The drawing room of Winterbourne Manor had never seemed so empty, despite being filled with people. Inspector Craddock had assembled everyone, the family, the servants, even the vicar Mr. Thornley, who'd been summoned from the village to provide spiritual comfort in the aftermath of Eleanor's suicide attempt. She survived, barely, Dr. Fenton's quick action having purged enough of the digitalis to save her life. Now she sat in a wheelchair, grey as death itself, Charles hovering protectively at her side. It was 2 days after Boxing Day, the snow finally beginning to clear, though Winterbourne remained cut off from normal life. The police had taken over the East Wing, conducting interviews, gathering evidence, building their case against Diana Carrington, the woman they'd known as Mrs. Yates. Miss Marple sat in her customary corner, knitting completed now, folded neatly in her bag. She'd been asked to remain, to provide testimony, and Inspector Craddock had specifically requested she attend this gathering. A final clarification, he'd said. Before we close this investigation, the Christmas tree still stood, though its candles remained unlit. The golden angel at the apex seemed to watch over the proceedings with eternal, unmoved serenity. 11 smaller angels decorated the branches. The 12th, truth and judgment, remained in evidence, tagged and sealed, proof of premeditation. Craddock stood before the fireplace, his notebook open, his face grave. I've called you all together, because there are aspects of this case that require explanation. Mrs. Diana Carrington has confessed to the murder of Sebastian Ashworth, and has waived her right to remain silent. With her permission, I'm going to share the full story, so that you might understand what happened here and why. He paused, looking at each face in turn. Catherine, pale and hollow-eyed. Philip, for once stripped of his sardonic armor. Vera, clutching Charles's hand like a lifeline. Dr. Fenton, aged a decade in 3 days. And Eleanor, propped in her wheelchair, staring at nothing. 40 years ago, Craddock began. 2 solicitors named James Ashworth and Sebastian Ashworth handled the estate of Colonel Marcus Carrington. The will specified that the estate should go to the colonel's illegitimate daughter Diana, with provisions for her care and maintenance. But James Ashworth, with Sebastian's reluctant assistance, suppressed a crucial codicil to the will, and instead directed the estate to the colonel's nephew, collecting substantial fees for their services. The rightful heir, Diana Carrington, received nothing. We know this already, Philip said impatiently. Bear with me. What you don't know is what happened next. Diana Carrington, 19 years old, pregnant, and abandoned by her lover, died by suicide in September 1895. She drowned herself in the Thames. But the child she carried, a daughter, was delivered posthumously and survived. This child was placed in an orphanage and later adopted by a servant woman named Martha Yates, who gave the girl her own surname. Catherine made a small sound. Charles's hand tightened on her mother's wheelchair. The child grew up as Diana Yates, knowing nothing of her true heritage. She entered service young, became pregnant herself at 19, and gave up her own daughter for adoption. Through a terrible irony, that daughter was eventually adopted by James and Eleanor Ashworth, the very people who had destroyed her grandmother's life. Dear God, Dr. Fenton breathed. Diana Yates, now calling herself Mrs. Yates and having altered her age and background, obtained a position at Winterbourne Manor 30 years ago. She served this family faithfully, not knowing they'd stolen her inheritance, not knowing her own daughter lived under this roof as Catherine Ashworth. She didn't learn the truth until Christmas Eve, when Sebastian Ashworth, racked by guilt, presented her with evidence of her identity. Craddock turned to Catherine, his expression softening. Miss Ashworth, the woman you knew as your housekeeper is your biological mother, and your biological grandmother was Diana Carrington, the woman your adoptive grandparents wronged 40 years ago. Catherine had gone white. No, that's not. Mrs. Yates can't be my mother. She's Mrs. Yates. She made my breakfast. She mended my clothes. She's a woman who gave up her child out of desperation, and spent 30 years watching that child grow up as a stranger, Miss Marple said gently. Just as her own mother would have watched her, had Diana Carrington lived. The pattern repeating, Craddock said, generation after generation, women abandoned and surviving as best they could, until Sebastian Ashworth tried to break that pattern with truth, and my mother Diana killed him for it, Catherine said flatly. Yes. She put cyanide in his tea, knowing you would deliver it, knowing it would muddy the investigation. She killed him, not for money, but to prevent her true identity from being revealed. She preferred being Mrs. Yates, respectable housekeeper, to being Diana Carrington, illegitimate heir to a contested fortune. But why? Vera's voice was plaintive. If she could have had everything, money, position, acknowledgement, why choose servitude? Miss Marple spoke up from her corner. Because Mrs. Yates had spent 30 years building a life, a reputation, an identity. She was respected, trusted, secure in her role. To become Diana Carrington would mean exposing herself as illegitimate, as a woman who'd given up her child, as someone who'd lied about her entire history. It would mean scandal, scrutiny, and the destruction of everything she'd carefully constructed. Some people prefer a comfortable lie to a devastating truth. That's madness, Philip said. That's human nature, Miss Marple corrected. We're all capable of murder when our fundamental sense of self is threatened. Diana, both Dianas, mother and daughter, were women destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. The elder Diana, destroyed by poverty and shame. The younger Diana destroying herself through decades of suppressed identity. And in the end, she destroyed Sebastian rather than face who she really was. Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice a rustle of dead leaves. It was all my fault, James's and mine. If we'd honored the will, if we'd given Diana Carrington what was rightfully hers, none of this would have happened. No suicide, no orphan, no murder. The blood of 3 people is on my hands. 4, Charles said heavily. Catherine's real father, whoever he was probably destroyed by scandal too. Actually, Craddock consulted his notes. Diana has told us about that. Catherine's father was Richard Ashworth, James's younger brother. He was a wastrel, seduced young Diana when she was in service at his London house. When she told him she was pregnant, he gave her money for an abortionist and dismissed her. He died in a riding accident 5 years later. Catherine let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. So I'm not just an Ashworth by adoption. I'm an Ashworth by blood. My father was my adoptive father's uncle. The family tree is so twisted, it strangled itself. In a sense, yes, Craddock agreed. You're James and Eleanor's great-niece by blood, and their adopted daughter. You're also the great-granddaughter of Colonel Carrington, which makes you a legitimate heir to what remains of his estate. I don't want it, Catherine said immediately. I don't want any of it. The money is cursed. Everything touched by this family is cursed. That may be, Craddock said, but there are legal matters to resolve. The Carrington estate was substantial. Even after 40 years, there's money to be claimed, money that belongs to you and to your mother, Diana. My mother, who murdered to keep her secrets. Catherine stood abruptly. My mother, who let me believe I was an orphan while she polished silver and served tea. My mother, who's going to hang for murder. What am I supposed to do with that, Inspector? How am I supposed to feel? However you feel, Miss Marple said quietly. There's no right way to respond to such revelations. But I will tell you this, my dear. Your mother asked me to tell you she's sorry for giving you up, for the deception, for everything. She said she was too weak and too angry to break the cycle of harm, but she wanted you to know she loved you. In her way, she always loved you. Catherine's composure shattered. She collapsed back into her chair, sobbing, and it was Philip who went to her, awkward but genuine in his comfort. Vera spoke up, her voice small. What about me? Sebastian thought I might be Diana's daughter. He questioned me about my adoption. You're not, Craddock said. Your birth records check out. You're exactly who you've always believed yourself to be. The daughter of a gambling wastrel who engineered your marriage to Charles for social advancement. Not a pleasant truth, but not this particular tragedy. Thank God. Vera breathed. At least that's something. The vicar, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. Inspector, what will happen to Diana Carrington now? What punishment will she face? Trial for murder. The evidence is overwhelming, and she's confessed. If convicted, she'll likely hang, though her solicitor may argue for mitigating circumstances. The revelation of her identity, the trauma of discovering her history, the provocation of Sebastian's threat to expose her. Will that work? Probably not. Murder is murder regardless of motive. The law is quite clear. But is it just? Thornley's voice rose with passion. This woman was wronged from before her birth. Her mother was driven to suicide by the Ashworths' theft. She grew up in poverty, gave up her child, served the family that destroyed her life, all unknowing. And when she finally learnt the truth, she acted to protect herself, the only way she knew how. Where's the justice in hanging her for that? The justice, Craddock said firmly, is in not allowing people to poison other people, regardless of their grievances. Sebastian Ashworth may have been planning to humiliate and expose Diana, but he wasn't threatening her life. She had other options. She could have fled, fought the revelation legally, or simply accepted the truth and dealt with the consequences. Instead, she chose murder. That choice has consequences too. Miss Marple set aside her knitting bag and stood, drawing all eyes. Inspector Craddock is right, of course. The law must be upheld, but Vicar Thornley is also right. There are layers of injustice here that the law cannot address. The original theft by James Ashworth, the abandonment of both Dianas by men who should have protected them, the class system that made poor women disposable, the shame attached to illegitimacy that destroyed lives. These things are wrong, profoundly wrong, but they're not illegal. She moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds. I've observed human nature for 70 years, and I've learnt this: we're all capable of terrible things when pushed far enough. We're also capable of terrible things simply out of selfishness or greed, without being pushed at all. The difference matters. What difference does it make to Sebastian? Philip asked bitterly. He's just as dead whether Diana was driven to it or chose it freely. The difference, Miss Marple said, is in understanding. Not excusing, but understanding. Diana Carrington killed Sebastian Ashworth because he threatened to destroy the identity she'd built over 30 years. That identity, Mrs. Yates, respected housekeeper, was all she had. Without it, she was nothing. A bastard, a woman who'd given up her child, a servant who'd spent decades bowing to the family that destroyed her mother. She couldn't face being that person. She turned back to face them. I knew a woman once in St. Mary Mead who discovered at 60 that her entire life was a lie. Her husband had married her under false pretenses. Her children weren't biologically hers. Her social position was built on deception. When the truth came out, she didn't kill anyone, but she did walk into the woods one winter night and never came back. We found her in the spring, frozen under a tree. She'd chosen death over facing who she really was. You're saying we should pity Diana, Eleanor said. Her voice was stronger now, though still weak. You're saying we should forgive her. I'm saying we should understand her. Pity, perhaps. Forgiveness is between her and God. Miss Marple returned to her seat. But I'm also saying that this tragedy didn't begin with Diana poisoning Sebastian. It began 40 years ago when James Ashworth chose profit over honesty. Every death since then, the elder Diana's suicide, the younger Diana's murder of Sebastian, even your own suicide attempt, Mrs. Ashworth, every death stems from that original sin. The room fell silent. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The winter sun broke through clouds, sending pale light through the windows, illuminating the Christmas tree's angel with golden radiance. Finally, Charles spoke. What do we do now? How do we make this right? You can't make it right, Miss Marple said bluntly. The dead stay dead. The harm done can't be undone. But you can choose what happens next. You can fight Diana's claim to the Carrington estate, tie it up in courts for years, preserve your fortune at the cost of more scandal and suffering. Or you can acknowledge the truth, make restitution, and try to build something better from the ruins. You want us to give up everything, Vera said. I want you to choose consciously, to decide whether money built on theft is worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth defending. Only you can make that choice. Eleanor's hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair. I choose truth. I choose restitution. Whatever remains of the Carrington estate belongs to Catherine and to Diana. They are the rightful heirs. Let the law take what it will from us. Let society judge us, as it will. I won't compound my husband's sin with my own continued theft. Charles looked at his mother in shock. Mother, that's everything we have. The house, the investments, built on blood money, built on a dead girl's inheritance. Eleanor's face was set with determination. I tried to die rather than face this truth, Charles. God saw fit to spare me. I won't waste that chance by continuing to live a lie. We'll make restitution. All of it. Every penny. And if that leaves us paupers, so be it. Better poor and honest than rich and damned. I agree, Catherine said suddenly. I don't want money from the family that destroyed my grandmother, but I'll accept it on behalf of that grandmother, Diana Carrington, who drowned herself at 19. I'll use it to help other young women in similar circumstances. Unwed mothers, orphans, women abandoned by men who should have protected them. That's what grandmother would have wanted. And your mother? Craddock asked gently. Diana, who murdered Sebastian? Catherine's face hardened. I don't know. I need time to think, to feel, to understand. She's my mother, but she's also a stranger who killed in my house. How do I reconcile that? One day at a time, Miss Marple said. And perhaps eventually, with a visit. Prison walls don't prevent conversation or understanding or even love. If you choose. The gathering began to break up. Craddock had statements to take, evidence to catalogue, a case to build. Dr. Fenton helped Eleanor back to her room. Philip and Vera slipped away, and eventually only Catherine and Miss Marple remained in the drawing room with its unlit Christmas tree. What do I do now? Catherine asked. How do I go on knowing all this? The same way everyone goes on after tragedy. You wake up tomorrow, you take the next step, you decide what kind of person you want to be, knowing what you now know about where you came from. Miss Marple picked up her knitting bag. Your grandmothers, both of them, were destroyed by circumstances and by the choices of others. Your mother chose murder to protect herself. You can choose differently. You can choose to break the cycle of harm rather than continuing it. How? By being kind. By being honest. By helping others when you can. By forgiving when you're able. Miss Marple smiled. By knitting, perhaps. Making something beautiful and useful from tangled threads. Catherine laughed, a sound close to tears. I don't know how to knit. I could teach you if you'd like. I'll be here a few more days giving statements. We could spend an hour or two with needles and yarn. It's very soothing, knitting. Gives the hands something to do while the heart heals. I'd like that. Catherine looked up at the golden angel atop the tree. Do you think God forgives people like my mother? People who murder? I think, Miss Marple said carefully, that God's mercy is larger than we can imagine. But I also think that mercy doesn't mean escaping consequences. Your mother will face earthly justice for what she did. Whether she faces heavenly judgment or mercy is between her and God. And me? Am I damned by association? Tainted by this family's sins? You're a young woman who's just learnt devastating truths about her origins. You're not damned. You're free. Free to choose who you'll be, now that you know who you are. That's a rare gift, though it probably doesn't feel like one now. They sat together in silence as the winter sun moved across the floor, lighting dust motes in golden shafts, transforming the ordinary into something almost sacred. Finally, Miss Marple rose. I should let you rest. Tomorrow, if you'd like, we'll have that knitting lesson. I've just finished a cardigan for my great-nephew's baby. Perhaps we could start something for you. A shawl, maybe, or a scarf. Something warm to wrap around you while you heal. Thank you, Miss Marple, for everything. For understanding, for explaining, for not judging. My dear, Miss Marple said gently. I'm too old for judging. I've seen too much of human nature to be surprised by anything. We're all capable of darkness and light, of courage and cowardice, of love and murder. The question is which we choose, moment by moment, day by day. She paused at the door, looking back at the young woman sitting alone beneath the Christmas angel. Choose light, Catherine. Choose kindness. Choose to be the person who breaks the cycle rather than continuing it. That's how you honor your grandmothers, both of them. Epilogue. Miss Marple left Winterbourne Manor 3 days later, when the roads had finally cleared and Inspector Craddock had finished taking his statement. The case was proceeding as expected. Diana Carrington would face trial in the spring, her confession making conviction all but certain. Eleanor Ashworth had begun the process of settling the Carrington estate, working with solicitors to determine what remained of the fortune and how to distribute it between Catherine and Diana. It wouldn't be everything. 40 years of investments and reinvestments had transformed the original sum, but it would be substantial. Enough to fund Catherine's charitable foundation for unwed mothers. Enough, perhaps, to provide Diana with some comfort in prison, or after, if by some chance the jury showed mercy. Charles had taken a position with a firm in London, abandoning the country life to work for a salary, rather than live on inherited wealth. Vera had gone with him. grimly determined to build a life based on honest labor rather than stolen fortune. Philip had surprised everyone by volunteering to manage the charitable foundation, bringing his skills at persuasion and charm to the service of actual good. And Catherine had begun to visit her mother in prison. Awkward visits at first, full of silences and unspoken questions, but visits nonetheless. The beginning, perhaps, of understanding if not forgiveness. As her train pulled away from the village station, Miss Marple took out her knitting. A new project, a shawl in soft grey wool that Catherine had chosen herself during their lessons. She'd given Catherine the pattern and yarn to continue the work, but had started one of her own as well. The rhythm of the needles was soothing. Click, click, click. Each stitch a small act of creation, of order brought from chaos, of beauty made from tangled threads. She thought of the golden angel, still in police evidence, symbol of truth and judgment. She thought of both Diana's, mother and daughter, destroyed and destroying across the generations. She thought of Catherine, learning to knit, learning to heal, learning to be herself rather than the person others had made her. Outside the train window, the winter landscape rolled past, fields covered in snow, trees bare and black against white ground, and here and there a cottage with smoke rising from the chimney, promising warmth within. Such a sad story, the woman across from her said, gesturing to the newspaper in her lap. Miss Marple could see the headline, "Housekeeper confesses to Christmas murder, shocking family secrets revealed." Yes, Miss Marple agreed. But not without hope. Even in the darkest stories there's usually a thread of redemption if one looks carefully enough. You sound like you know something about it. I was there, Miss Marple said simply. I saw it all unfold. A tragedy certainly, but also a reckoning. Sometimes truth must be told, no matter the cost. And sometimes that truth destroys us. But occasionally, just occasionally, it sets us free. The woman wanted to ask more, but Miss Marple had returned to her knitting, her needles clicking steadily, her face serene. She was thinking of St. Mary Mead, of her own small cottage, of the garden waiting for spring. She was thinking of ordinary life, ordinary evil, ordinary grace, the things she knew best, the things she'd spent a lifetime observing. And she was thinking of angels, not golden ornaments on Christmas trees, but the small mercies of daily life, the kindness of strangers, the patience of teachers, the courage of young women learning to heal, the redemption that might come in time, even for murderers. Truth and judgment, she murmured, too softly for anyone else to hear, but also mercy. Always, in the end, mercy. Her needles continued their steady rhythm as the train carried her home through the winter afternoon, leaving Winterbourne Manor and its sorrows behind. The Christmas season was over. The angel had done its work. Now came the long, patient work of healing. Click, 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 stitch by stitch, row by row, hope from despair, the way it had always been, the way it would always be. The end.